onto computer. Okay, hi everyone. So welcome to the Controlling Our Thoughts video chat. And firstly, I'd just like to say thank you for the people who are joining live, which is Emma, Sarah, and Christy. And for those of you who are watching after the event on thinkup.tv, I hope this conversation adds some value. I'm certainly looking forward to seeing what I can learn. And I think in opening, and to quote Einstein, who said that if he had 1 hour to solve the world's hardest problems, he would spend the first 55 minutes defining the question. In the spirit of that, I think the starting point that I would like to kick off with is what we mean by controlling our thoughts. And so my interpretation, I'd like to go around the people in the conversation to start with on this definition, is when I saw that the poll choice being controlling our thoughts or controlling your thoughts, the first thing that comes to my mind is how we are able to be the masters of our thoughts as opposed to being the slaves of our thoughts. That's immediately I went all tribal on it. So I don't know whether that's the way that other people interpreted that question. Christy, I'm going to hand over to you first, and then to Sarah, and then to Emma, in terms of how we define this whole subject.
Okay, cool. So yeah, just basically, I kind of thought it was around how we don't let our thoughts control our emotions, or how we can ensure that they have a less of a negative impact on our emotions, which I guess is kind of the same thing. Or similar.
I can see that. And Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, similar really, I guess, in terms of controlling your thoughts so there's a positive outcome of them. I think, again, I'm always trying to hang things on in a positive way. So yeah, it's just the ability that, you know, you are in control of your thoughts. So your thoughts shouldn't theoretically be in control of your behaviours and your actions.
And Emma.
So interestingly, and Sarah put this really well, I went to a kind of midpoint between Christy and Sarah's point of view, where the first thing for me was about controlling like that imposter syndrome, that lizard brain that's overcautious and wants to protect you by being really negative and keeping you at home in a cupboard. And then like the elevated form of this is how can you elevate yourself? How can you do more? How can you expand? How can you be better?
I see. And so staying with you, Emma, do you have how important do you see this topic being in terms of our well-being? And I mean well-being holistically. Is this something that is a priority that you suspect is of massive importance?
So it's interesting that you say that. I've actually come to recently regard this as one of the most important things people can do. And like Jonathan, we know each other quite well, and I won't go into like a huge amount of detail, but I know a lot of people who struggle with their mental health. I know a lot of people who've suffered a lot of trauma in their early lives as an adult, in every way, shape and form, and horrible thing that you can think of. And so it's been a kind of personal interesting to me about the people I care about. How do you deal with that? And I've kind of come full circle, and I've come to believe that it's this aspect that looks quite surface, but if you can control your thoughts and not only go past like the negative numbers, but also control them in a really positive, augmented kind of way, you don't necessarily have to do that, you know, years of psychotherapy, years of trying to deal and understand trauma. You can deal with it here and now and just move on. Does that make sense? It's something that's preoccupied me, so I might not be being particularly articulate about it.
It seems totally in line with how I see it, actually, and I personally have felt almost by the day, without being too hyperbolic, an increasing awareness of the importance of this, to such an extent that I find it difficult to see what could be more.
Yeah, 100%.
Salient. Yeah, Sarah, what's your thinking in terms of importance on this?
Sorry. Yeah, very much similar to Emma, really. I think that it's almost, it's not a new thing, you know, like the gut, mind, body, spirit, they're all sort of connected. And I think from my own life experience, I'm starting to think that, you know, like, you know, your brain is almost like that computer that's controlling everything. And I think we've probably all got tons of examples where we've had a negative thought and we've hung on to that, and then that's had some really, negative impact on, you know, on your sort of progress and moving forward. I've been away with a couple of friends, and we've started to think that actually, and we realise Elon Musk has said this already, but it's like, oh, we're in like an AI simulation. Am I being run by like a 13-year-old boy sometimes? And battling against this like Matrix computer game. And obviously that's a joke. I don't really believe that. But it's kind of, it sort of feeds into that idea that, you know, you can control your environment and how you feel about things. But sometimes, for me personally, I had to go through quite a crappy period of my life to get to this point. And it's just that awareness. I think I've just got a lot more awareness now in terms of how my thoughts impact on not just myself, but also the people around me.
Well said. And Christy, what about you? What are you thinking about this?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with what everybody else has said. You know, sometimes I've had situations where I've been thinking stuff, and it's had a really negative impact on a really negative emotional impact, and also physiological. So like actually making myself sick about certain things. So learning how to turn that around has been really important. I'm not always that good at it, but I'm getting a lot better. So
you are. From being the person at the other end of the phone sometimes on that journey, you are definitely getting really good at that now. Okay, so good. So back over to you, Emma. I want to run past an idea with you, and that I've been kind of playing with in my head for the last while, and seeing whether you can relate to it in any way, or whether you have a different model. I have used something called RAIN, RAIN, myself to process thoughts and feelings. The R stands for when either a feeling or a thought I've experienced, I first recognize what it is. I recognize the shape, the texture, the color, and that's the first thing that I do. The second thing, the A, is that I accept it rather than fight it. So I don't try and repel it or reject it straight away. I accept it. The I is I then investigate it, and investigate the thought or the feeling in terms of its impact and what it gives me or what it takes from me. And the N is the non-identification of it, so of me and it. So I don't then identify myself with that thought or feeling. It is something that I am separate to, and therefore I can observe and therefore control. That's what I use. I use the RAIN acronym.
So I love that. I love that last bit, and that it's a separation, because I think that's crucial. And I think so many people, their identity is made up of the things that they experience and the emotions they experience, and it takes up too much space, and it keeps you back from a bit of growth. So I love that. I haven't heard that before, Jonathan. So you're way ahead of me in terms of that it's that you've codified this and given yourself a process that's easy to remember and that you can deploy even when under stress, I presume, because it's so simple.
Yeah, in fact, I've had to. I've even. It's the reason why I got through the World Championships last week. You know, you can't, in front of 200 competitors who are all trying to break each other's necks. It's extremely tempting to think that you're in a danger zone. Right,
and for your body to physically react to that and start shutting down. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. So what I do is there's two things. So if I'm feeling negative about something, and I mean negative as to, you know, when you're like, oh, this is killing me, or like, I mean, like super negative like that. But then also even down to the smaller like range of emotions, like, oh, this is boring, this is tedious, I'm tired. As soon as it's something negative, I'm like, okay, so what is this about? So I either rationalize it. So, okay, you're not expected to be super happy. waiting for over an hour at the doctor's. That's okay. This is a normal way to feel. You can get over it. This isn't an exceptional circumstance. And the second thing I do, I think about whether that negativity serves me. So if it's, oh, I'm so bored, I've got to do my tax returns this weekend, then that is something that I actually need to change, because your brain exists to pull you away from pain and push you towards pleasure, right? So if you attach something and say to your mind that it's negative, that it's, that it's killing you, that it's stressing you out, it's going to try and pull you away from that. So it's either going to give you low energy, it's going to distract you, it's going to make you sick, it's going to find any way that it can to pull you away from that activity. So if it's something actually that I want to do, that I need to do, like my tax return, I'm like, actually, you know what? I'm fortunate that I'm even doing my tax return, that I'm in a position where I have my own business that is so successful that at least a few people have paid me, and I need to do this. So I either rationalize it and make it ordinary, or I ask if it's serving what I need to do. And if the negativity is not serving me, then I completely turn it on its head and frame it in a way where it gives me energy to get through it. It's a privilege to get through it. It's a pleasure to do it, because this is actually symptomatic of success and something that's good in my life. Does that make sense?
Awesome. I really like that. And I've written it down. I'm learning as we speak. So, Sarah, do you have a process of controlling your thoughts or feelings?
I think so, but I think I have lots of different processes. I think that so someone said this to me the other day, and I think it's a much older lady who's had a very challenging life, and she said what you need in life is joy, acceptance, and adventure. And I quite like the three of them together, because I think what you were saying about acceptance is really, really important, because you have to accept the things that you can't change. So for me, I've done a lot of blocking out my negative thoughts for a very long time, because I'm like, I haven't got time to deal with this. I've got loads of other stuff I need to do, park it somewhere, and try and seek joy in different places. But what I have learned actually is it's really important to allow yourself to feel some sadness, and it's healthy to feel sadness. Whereas for a good 25 years, I was very much just putting my sadness in a box and putting it in a drawer somewhere. Whereas I think I'm still learning, and there's lots of different models that I use, and they all relate back to thought. A lot of it is sort of CBT techniques, but one of my favorites is a three-legged stool, which is where you have pleasure, routine, and necessary. So obviously your tax returns, things like that, they're absolutely necessary, but it's making sure that my three-legged stool is balanced with all those activities, because actually I'll start to feel negative if all I'm doing is like the mundane, boring routine, and I haven't done anything pleasurable. So for me, there's lots of different things, and self-care, going for a massage, spending some money on skincare, stuff that brings me joy is important. But I think acceptance 100% is part of that. Sort of also forgiveness and forgiving yourself, because everybody gets negative thoughts sometimes, and the imposter syndrome thing, I think both men and women suffer from that sometimes, and that can kind of descend you into a pit of despair. So I think I like what you've done, I think, with the RAIN thing, because I certainly haven't created myself an acronym. I've got all sorts of different things that I use, but I like the idea of creating something.
Okay, awesome. And Christy, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so I like the RAIN acronym, and the turning, trying to turn a negative thought into a positive thought, and thinking, gratitude, I guess. What I like to do is, what I find is I'm very visual. So what I find is, if I'm having, say, negative thoughts, or even sometimes it might be positive thoughts, if I don't write them down or draw it out, then I don't really have a way of resolving it. So I like to write things out, and that sounds strange, but it helps me to see it. So it helps me to start to organize what I'm thinking and feeling, and working out steps of what I can do to kind of get where I need to go, or coming up with solutions. So it helps me move from focusing on a problem or focusing on just the negative thought to turning it into some way that I can actually resolve that and get a better outcome.
Yeah, and to reflect on that, and also to link back to some of the things that Sarah and Emma have also said, I have found there's an immense power or effectiveness in the ability to have an objective in mind, and to Emma's point of whether what we're thinking at that time is serving us well, or enabling us to achieve what we want to achieve. A clarity of objective, setting an intention or an aspiration has been, it's slightly cliched in the world now, the Jim Carrey $10 million check story, but I think that cliches are cliches because they're true. Jim Carrey, for those who don't know the story, when he started out his acting career, day one, he wrote himself a check for $10 million, and it was waiting, and he had it in preparation for the eventual $10 million he would get from acting. And a few years later, he wrote that on Thanksgiving, by the way, on Thanksgiving Day. A few years later, on Thanksgiving Day, he got his first payment check for Dumb and Dumber, and it was exactly $10 million. And the mental rehearsal that he had done, he had no doubt that he would eventually become, to arrive at the place where he would do in acting. And it was just a matter of time. And I'm a fan of that objective setting and qualifying whether or not, and to Emma's point, and we rationalize something, or we can essentially qualify it as to whether or not it's serving us and serving our objective. Emma, do you have, how important do you place objective setting in your mix?
I think it's absolutely crucial to have objectives, and I'll tell you why. So the average human makes 10 major decisions in their life, right? Do I move to this country? Do I break off this relationship? Do I get married to this person? Do I go to university here? Do I take this job? Do I take that job? Blah, 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 blah. And those 10 decisions altogether are about 10 million different lives that you could potentially have, right? If you don't have objectives, if you haven't thought about, okay, and anchored those objectives and things like, what do I really want? What are my strengths? What fulfills me? Where are my values? Because all of those, it's an all working out. It's like workshopping yourself. Ending up with objectives that serve those things mean that when an opportunity comes up, you know what the shape of it is. You know whether it matches. And until you've explored that, because thought is incredibly abstract. So you may think you know yourself, but until you've consciously developed this dialogue with yourself and what you want, what your values are, you're not going to be able to act on it in a way that is succinct, in a way that is targeted, in a way that is effective. So I think, so I think they're really crucial in terms of navigation of your life.
Yeah, I believe that there are 5 aesthetic properties of thought, and they, the way I see it, is, and they're in no particular order. I see clarity as an extraordinary aesthetic quality of, in terms of the clarity of objectives, the clarity of understanding of who we are and how we think and where we're going and what serves us and what doesn't serve us, etc. The second is strength, and I see strength of thought as an aesthetic property that enables us to do the things, for instance, Emma, as you say, of reframing something from tax return being actually we're in a fortunate position of doing a tax return.
Yeah.
And so that's the strength part. The third I see is impact, and I see impact as the link between how we think and the productive outcome that happens, or the change in behavior for a productive, beneficial outcome that happens.
And without an objective, there is no impact on anything, because that it doesn't even exist, that dynamic.
Indeed. And then the fourth one I see as flexibility, in our ability to not be stuck inside frameworks that are repeat patterns. And I've said on a video or two, we think between 60 to 70,000 thoughts per day. and 90% of them are the same as the day before. And so in our daily life, we tend to be naturally inside a comfort zone, a framework, even if that framework is negative, we still ourselves remember the feeling, and that can be continuous grief, it can be continuous joy, whatever. And the fifth aesthetic property that I see is alignment. And the alignment is, in my view, the alignment between our thoughts and our values. So if, for instance, we are quantifying how we think or what we're doing, we could in fact do worse than to align it with our sets of values that we actually want to live by and what we admire to ourselves to live by.
100%.
And I've seen that to be quite useful. And that, sadly, that CSIFA 5-way thought aesthetic doesn't make an acronym. So maybe I should reposition the words to make one.
It is the acronym that's the important bit, Jonathan. Don't forget that.
That's what's coming across from this call. Yeah. So, Sarah, without divulging any of your past, because that's not my story to share, we've all been through our own versions of tough times, and but I'm most recently aware of your experiences. Have you, without having necessarily a model in mind, a model of thought that you use, do you, as you've been processing the challenges you've been through, did you actually have a relatively clear idea of what good looks like in terms of the life you'd like to be living, or the environment of work you'd like to have? Did you actually have that clarity in your mind? You might still be on mute.
Oh, there you go. Right. Yeah, I think the objective setting thing, I think, is really, really important, because actually I've always started to look at myself, not as an organisation, but a bit like having had a career in PR and communications for 20 years. You spend your whole time setting objectives and looking at the values of an organisation, because clearly if the values are right, you've got the right number of staff there, you can achieve the goals that you've set for yourself. And I think from a personal point of view, having gone through a difficult, toxic work situation, and then brought back issues that I'd had from my childhood that I'd sort of buried, all of that coming out. So essentially I talk about myself almost like I've had 25 years of therapy in 18 months almost. And I think I certainly, from what good looks like, I certainly knew what I didn't want. I'd kind of got to the point where I was sort of fed up of being that empath who ends up in that position, and I've started to realize, the energy that you give out, that that does attract the kind of people that are around you and the environment that you have. So I think I'm clearly still on my journey and I'm still learning, but I think you have to be quite brave to set your intentions about what you're willing and what you're not willing to put up with, from either a work situation, family, or friends. And I think, listening to all of you in terms of the objective setting, 100%, I feel like I know what good looks like, and that is to be and I'm in a much better place now than I was probably even 6 months ago, because I've set objectives for myself, and the adding value element is really, really important, because you start to kind of realize, you don't become so cold that you ditch everyone, but you're much more aware around what charity work you're involved in, all of the different things that we all do, but being a little bit self-full about it and saying, actually, how does this add value to my life? And I think that's certainly been a big shift, and something that I genuinely wasn't doing, that my needs weren't a priority for me. Whereas now I've realised it's okay to say I'm going to put myself first.
Absolutely right. Christy, what's your thoughts on this?
Look, I set objectives all the time. I'm really big on lists and that kind of thing. From a personal perspective, what I did at the start of the year was identified 8 areas of my life and set goals and objectives around them. So every day I write out a list of affirmations. So there's one affirmation for each of those. And what I find is it helps to give me focus and discipline. it's not, I don't believe in the kind of woo-woo, affirmation thing. I think it's more about discipline and focus. So, and kind of designing the life that I want and where I want to go. So, yeah, that's kind of what I do. And I guess sort of similar at work as well. Obviously it's important to make sure that what I'm doing aligns with my values, which I think it does. And, setting objectives and setting goals and working towards those. So that's, that's kind of the approach that I take. You're on mute, mate.
I knew that. I didn't know that. So didn't know that. Emma, from what we've been discussing, what are your reflections? What have you, knowing you as I do, I imagine that through this conversation, there's been about 25 different points that you could have actually made and discussed on, because you are actually an expert in this area, which is one of the reasons why I'm so honoured that you're on this call. What have been your reflections from this?
I just never stopped being struck by actually how simple our solutions for a fulfilling and happy life are, and my frustration that more people don't know about them. Like behavioral science, the research is in, like we know this stuff now, and it just needs to be out there and accessible for everyone. This is something that literally democratizes success, like knowing these very simple things. And so that's why I do what I do. That's why I have the conversations that I have, because everybody just needs to know this, because it's these little tweaks that really just set people free.
And actually, I think, not that I've ever thought this to be an approach before, but I think it would be worthwhile, Emma, if you could just spend 30 seconds talking about what it is that you actually do. And because I think that anyone who watches this video post hoc would also find that of value, just to hear from what it is that you are up to.
Thank you. So I fairly recently, as in the last couple of years, retrained as a coach. So my background is advertising and marketing, and then working with startups, and then doing my own projects, because I realized I was simultaneously unmanageable and unemployable, as all the best people are. So you have to work for yourself.
Almost all of us on this call.
Yeah, everyone worthwhile is. Massive bias there. And I retrained because I realized that all these amazing people, they were doing these incredible things. They had incredible startups. They were really creative. They were moving the needle, changing the landscape. All of these people had so much anxiety and imposter syndrome, and they lived with these horrible things. They lived with this, inside their heads was hell. And no one, you wouldn't know it looking at them. And so I decided to do something about it. So I started studying. I started looking at behavioral science. I realized that typical coaching courses don't go far enough, and that there is better research out there. There is better techniques. And in doing so, every time I take on a new client, I get to go through this amazing journey with them. And it compounds the messages, it compounds the techniques that we can use, that we can talk about. And you don't have to be, like, people think you need to be smart, you need to be a scientist, you need to be this super human being that has this perfect life. You don't. You just need to start doing it, and you can start really small and really simply. So that's what I do with people. I help them be more them.
Be more them. I love that. And
Yeah.
and if people want to find out more about you or get in touch, where can they go to?
They can go to, I'm on Twitter, EVJ. I'm on Facebook, Emma V. Jackson. Or my website is evj.af, which I want everybody to be themselves AF. No one gets that joke.
I get it.
I'm around. I'm on social media. You can find me. I'm around.
Excellent, awesome. And so, in any closing thoughts or comments, reflections, Sarah?
I'm totally going to be following you, Emma. I think completely. So last year, my exec coach. So I had a choice of 2 different exec coaches, and the one that I chose was the person who I felt more of a connection to, and I felt like I could be quite honest about my emotions, because I think there's this push to be perfect all the time, and you don't want to look like a victim if you're talking about certain issues, and you don't want to be judged for it. And actually, my exec coach, who has more experience, I think, of that behavioural element than probably the other one, encouraged me to, and I'm not here to market something, to buy the Greatness Journal, which essentially is that the journaling element, but part of like signing up to the Greatness Journal is to tell people what you've learned. And certainly whether people want to listen to me or not, and my boyfriend keeps saying to me, enough with your personal journeys, trying to wind me up. Obviously he can see the difference it's made to me, but I think totally agree that these are really simple techniques, and you see people living these kind of really unhappy and really hard lives, and actually if you're willing to do the hard work and actually taking a real look at yourself so you can be who you want to be, then actually it's worthwhile. And obviously for me and for some people, when you finally take some time off, you get to do that. Whereas for a lot of people, you don't have time to really think about these things. It takes something like a divorce or some big life event for you to actually look at yourself. But yeah, Emma, I'm very keen to look at your work, because I think people are crying out for that, I think, and more people should be willing to be brave and to seek out that kind of coaching. It's not just about your career progression, because actually without progressing in your personal life, then actually they're all in part of the same person, aren't they? So they need to marry together.
I think the healthiest people ask for help. I think it's a strong move. Certainly not. It's the opposite of a sign of weakness. Christy, what are your reflections of this conversation? Anything you want to say in closing?
No, I like ebj.af. I might steal it and make it kms.af. There you go.
Yours, darling.
Totally agree. Like, asking for help can be really scary, but I think it's really important as well, because you don't learn, to really learn, you need to ask for help, and whether that's from a personal reading or just expanding what you're thinking. And it's, like what Sarah's saying, I think it's so interesting that people don't actually take time to think about, how do you want your life to look? How do you want things to be? When you're growing up, people ask you, what do you want to do? They don't ask you how you want to live, or, what do you want your life to look like? It's what job do you want when you're older? And kind of everything is sort of revolves around that. So yeah, I totally agree. Mentoring's great. Asking for help, and learning, continuing to learn.
Absolutely, that's how we evolve. Good. Well, listen, I've been really properly, genuinely moved by this conversation, and the fact that you have all shared your insights as well with this. And it's just a real honor that we all managed to get in the same place at the same time, in 1, 2, 3 different time zones that we're in. So it's now 9:40 a.m. in boiling hot Key West. So I'm going to go and go outside in this blistering hot sunshine. I hope that you have some sunshine wherever you are. Obviously, Christy, it's 11, almost midnight with you, so there's not going to be very much of it there. But guys, thank you very much for joining. I'll post this on the ThinkUp group and on thinkup.tv. And thank you just so much. And for those watching, I hope this has been of value. And I shall see you next week once I've worked out what the next highest polling subject is, and we'll have another conversation then. Thank you so much, guys. I really, really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jonathan. And thanks, guys. Pleasure to meet you all.
Thanks. You too.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Awesome. Bye, everyone.